Coming to us from our home city of Brandon, Mississippi, our speaker tonight is the Honorable Carl Merck. And he has brought a couple of pieces from his Civil War collection. I don't know enough about him to speak about him, but I do know that Mr. Carl is a fine fellow, and we appreciate him coming here tonight to give us the talk. And would you give him a big round of applause, please?
Get my notes out here.
Just throw his junk off on the floor.
I want to thank Colonel Tim for inviting me here tonight to talk with y'all and visit with you for a while. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Hadn't been a member of the camp for maybe like 3 years. Wanted to pass this on that my great-great-grandmother's brother was the commanding officer of the Rankin Rough and Readys, which is the namesake of this SCV unit. But I wanted to start off by giving a little story here. We don't have any Democrats here tonight, do we? I think we all soldiers, people, that there's not going to be any liberal people here tonight. But the other night I was watching Fox News. Obama, they were talking about Obama's foreign policy and everything, or lack of.
Yeah, the lack
of foreign policy. And you know, Obama's always trying to compare himself to other great presidents and everything. Sometimes he's Abraham Lincoln, and then sometimes he'll invoke the name of Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt had a real strong foreign policy that I think everybody understood, which was walk softly, speak softly, and carry a big stick. Well, Obama heard that and he said, you know, that sounds pretty good. I like that big stick business. It makes me sound tough, maybe. So he got his staff together and everything else, and they had a good head together and talked about what could be Obama's legacy and everything else. And the only thing they could come up with was he could talk incessantly and carry nothing. Want to give a little poem here that I heard a long time ago that a friend of mine in high school wrote this song and had a little local band, but it was a song called The Civil War in 1861. The Civil War had just begun. Johnny Reb said, Yankee, won't you leave me alone? But he had to fight for his cause in his home. Old Beauregard charged with a rebel yell, guns a-blazing and hot. Well, he kept on firing for 34 hours, and he called to his men and said, Fort Sumter is ours. The war raged on for 4 long years, and mothers of plenty shed a river of tears. Lincoln would try Pope, McClellan, and Meade, but with General Grant he would succeed. There's many more stories that I could tell, but they all didn't end with a rebel yell. War raged on for 4 long years, and mothers of plenty shed a river of tears. Very bloody war, sad time for the South, a lot of proud memories and traditions that it has brought to all of us. But tonight I want to talk about a subject of Eli Whitney, Jefferson Davis, and arms for the Southern Confederacy. You know, you think it sounds funny that Eli Whitney, who was obviously a Yankee from New Haven, Connecticut, would be making arms for the South, just like old Sam Colt did. And there was one reason only for doing that, and that was money. They would work both sides of the river as long as the money was there, and they would manufacture guns for whoever, you know, could pay for them. Eli Whitney Sr. was born in 1765 in Westborough, Massachusetts. And everybody's heard of Eli Whitney. We can talk of Eli Whitney Jr., who was the one that primarily made most of the guns. But Eli Whitney, his father, was the father of the American systems of manufacture, which was interchangeable parts that most countries in the world for their military, even up until the British, up until the middle 1850s, did not have interchangeable parts for their guns. We didn't either. All the muskets and everything that you see people carrying and soldiers carried Revolutionary War, War of 1812, all the way up to maybe close to 1840, did not have interchangeable parts, and all the parts had to be manufactured and hand fitted. So you may have a buddy here that had an 1816 flintlock musket, you're in the military, and you've got one, you look at them side by side, they look just alike, but none of the parts will interchange. Barrels won't interchange, locks won't interchange, internal parts won't interchange. Eli Whitney also, as we all know, invented the cotton gin, which greatly affected the South. He invented the milling machine, which was a big advancement in making metal parts and what have you for industry. He died in 1825, and his son, who was the primary firearms producer at the Whitneyville Armory in New Haven, was 4 years old when he died. While he was growing up, he did influence the armory and the arms manufacturing some, and it was being run by two of his uncles and attorneys that were handling Eli Whitney Sr.'s estate. When he graduated from Princeton in 1842, he was already well advised of the armament improvements and systems that were coming along, like the flintlock system of ignition had been used for 150 years, and the Army officers were real reluctant to change anything because if it worked, they didn't want to change it. And they felt like if you had a flintlock, all you had to have really was powder and a rock to set it off. Well, the percussion system was a lot like a modern cartridge in that it had a separate primer that set off the charge in the barrel, and it was still a muzzle loader. Eli Whitney's first contract that really amounted to anything with the federal government was for the model 1841 rifle. That was a gun that was coming online for the U.S. military, which was the first rifled percussion musket that the military had. It was a short rifle with a 33-inch barrel, and it had a rifle bore, 7 lands and 7 grooves, and was an extremely well-made gun. Well, our representative from Mississippi, Jefferson Davis, was aware of these developments for the military, and the Mexican War was on the horizon, and the very first Mississippi rifles, and they became known as the Mississippi rifles, and then I'll explain why. The very first 1841 rifles that were manufactured were made by Eli Whitney under a contract of 1842, and he delivered 600 in 1844 and 1,200 in 1845. Under the Militia Act of 1808, the federal government was required to equip the various armories in the South, and the closest one to us was at Baton Rouge Arsenal. The Whitney 1841 rifles dated 1844 and 1845 were sent to Baton Rouge. Well, Jefferson Davis used his influence when the 1st Mississippi Infantry was being formed for the Mexican War to have those guns issued to his unit. Jefferson Davis later said, in terms of quality, they were as well made as any gun that he had ever seen, and in terms of accuracy, they were as accurate as any sporting rifle, and they were capable of hitting a man-sized target at 300 yards. Well, Jefferson Davis took his Mississippi infantry to the Mexican War, and at Battle of Buena Vista in February of 1847, they were greatly outnumbered by the Mexicans, which incidentally were using Revolutionary War period guns. They had Brown Bess flintlocks and Charleville muskets, and they came up against these Mississippians with these rifle muskets that were 54 caliber, fired a patch round ball, extremely accurate, could be loaded and shot very quickly, and the Mississippians distinguished themselves beautifully at Buena Vista. The government was so happy for what they did, they told the Mississippians, heck, you can have these guns, and we'll let you bring them home, and they can be your personal property. There were 368 of them brought back to Mississippi. So if you do the math, and you got 1,800 Whitneys dated 1844 and 1845, that means that if you've got one, there's a 1 in 6 chance it could be one that was issued to the 1st Mississippi Infantry. I have seen maybe 3 or 4 that were supposed to be attributed to Jefferson Davis's unit, and which would be a true Mississippi rifle. But I don't know of any that's absolutely 100% authenticated that can be proved that was used at Buena Vista in the Mexican War.
It's a Muscatoon, wasn't it?
Well, it was a 2-band rifle. A Muscatoon usually it could be a rifle gun, but it usually would have like a 22 or 24-inch barrel. These had 33-inch barrels.
Similar to the cavalry rifle.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, during the Civil War, the Mississippi rifle was a very popular gun with the South. I mean, the South absolutely loved them. They were enamored with them because of their experience with Jefferson Davis. So since then, since the Mexican War, the model 1841 U.S. rifle has been termed the Mississippi rifle. We're the only state that has a military gun that's named after their state. You got Kentucky rifles, the state of Kentucky, that's a commercial civilian gun. It was handmade, not military. Now that, fast forward to say 1856. There was a manufacturing concern in Windsor, Vermont called Robbins and Lawrence. And they made Mississippi rifles also. There were 6 manufacturers of the model 1841 Mississippi rifle, and Robbins and Lawrence was one of them. And I've got a real nice one right there laying there that I'll pick up in a minute. But the Crimean War was looming for the English and the Russians, and the English needed arms real bad. They were real short. And they contracted with Robbins and Lawrence in Windsor, Vermont to deliver 25,000 pattern 1853 Enfield rifle muskets, which I've got one of those over here. The war ended real quickly. Robbins and Lawrence had begged, borrowed, and done everything they could to gain capital to be able to tool up to manufacture this gun. They were only able to deliver 12,500 of the first contract of 25,000, and the Brits foreclosed on them and took their armory. Well, Eli Whitney Jr., he was an entrepreneur, and he knew a bargain when he saw a bargain, and he was always thinking, he was kind of like a hustler. I hate to say he was a hustler, but he was always looking at a way to make an easy, fast buck. So he bought all of the surplus guns and parts that Robbins and Lawrence had. He bought over 4,000, these would have been Enfield parts, 4,000 stocks, 5,000 barrels, 3,000 sets of barrel bands, and he put those back. Well, Eli Whitney made 14 different model guns, of which only 4 were actually accepted by the U.S. government. Their standards of their gauging and their inspection was so rigid that if they inspected 100 muskets, 40 of them would be rejected. Either the parts were bad or wrong, and they also had over a 30% failure in the barrels when they were proof tested with a double load and 2 bullets, and the barrels were burst. But he bought all these surplus parts at auction, bought out everything that Robbins and Lawrence had at their bankruptcy, and he got thinking, well, they're not buying very many more Mississippi rifles. He made them from 1844 to 1855. Whitney made 26,000 model 1841 Mississippi rifles. He said, I need something that I can sell. So he came up with the idea of what he called good and serviceable arms. And these were a assortment of Frankenstein arms that were made up of various parts that he had bought at bankruptcy at auction to create a gun that he called good and serviceable guns, because at that time it was pretty obvious that the North and the South were going to fight. Well, the state of Mississippi, and Jefferson Davis at that time, was a senator, said, we need some of the good old Mississippi rifles to equip our militia regiments with. We don't have enough guns. We've got a lot of flintlock percussion conversion. So he got in touch with his friend Eli Whitney, this was in 1860, and said, I want to order some Mississippi rifles from the state of Mississippi. He said, how many do you want? He said, we'll start with 2,500, 2,500, and we'd like to have you deliver them at the rate of 300 a month, as fast as you can make them. Well, he made up a quantity of 50 as samples to be given to the state of Mississippi. Well, old Whitney was thinking, you know, that bunch of rednecks down there, they hadn't really seen the Mississippi rifle since 1848. They're not going to know the difference. I'm just going to make up one of these good serviceable guns. I'll put patch box on it like a Mississippi rifle, and I'll put bands on the barrel like a Mississippi rifle, and they'll take it hook, line, and sinker, and I can make a fortune off these things. Well, he sent them down here. They looked at them, and the state adjutant wrote him back and said, these guns that you have sent us are old guns fixed up, is exactly what he called it. And they rejected the contract. But they still delivered 50 of them to the state of Mississippi. They were issued to the 10th, 11th, and 20th Mississippi Infantry Regiments. And everybody knows 11th, that was one of the university grades were in, Gettysburg and everything. This gun right here is one of the Whitney infield variants that was made up for the state of Mississippi. There's only 5 of these known. This is the only one known with 1841 Mississippi brass barrel bands. Well, the state of Georgia was a real good customer of Eli Whitney too in 1859 and 1860. So he took the balance of these guns that he had made up and sold them to the state of Georgia. This one's marked on the stock, St. Simon Guards. That was a pre-war Georgia regiment that was in charge of the forts that were on the barrier islands in the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico and everything. They were to guard the forts. Like I said, this is the only one of these known with Mississippi bands, and there's only like 3 known that were issued to the St. Simon Guard. St. Simon Guard became the first regiment of Georgia infantry. So this gun definitely saw Confederate service. It's got Georgia militia markings on the barrel and the stock.
I guess there was St. Simon's Island there just southeast of Savannah.
Yeah, out in Atlanta. And they still got a fort there, and it's a big resort area. This gun right here is the model 1841 Mississippi rifle. Now this one was made by Robinson Lawrence in Windsor, Vermont, the outfit that went bankrupt trying to furnish the British with guns. This one was dated 1849 and was made for the government. This particular gun was in real nice shape. It was issued to the 9th New Hampshire Infantry, which was present in Vicksburg, one battle region I was in, and it was also at Jackson. This gun was right out there where the University Medical Center is, coming up across Old Millsaps College golf course. The rifle was originally, the barrel was finished in a lacquer brown color, and the lock and the hammer were case colored in a mottled color, which is not going to mean a lot to a lot of people, but the Union officers would encourage their soldiers to burnish or polish their guns because they thought they looked ferocious in battle when they were in line. I've got another one here. This is a Whitney variant infield that was made out of the surplus parts that Robinson Lawrence was trying to sell the British government that Whitney bought. This is a very close copy of the English 3-band infield, with the exception that the lock is not anything like it. The trigger guard is off of a Mississippi rifle, and the barrel bands are the 1852 pattern British bands, like they were trying to make with the British. These, they made a total of 3,500 of these, Whitney did. The state of Maryland bought 2,000, which saw Confederate service for sure. 1,200 of them were bought by the state of Georgia, and 300 were bought by the state of Mississippi. That too, this is a real rare Confederate gun. I mean, you know, it saw Confederate service either with the state of Georgia, Maryland, or Mississippi. I like to think Mississippi, but you know, who knows?
Now, look, one of the questions I have, most bayonets I've saw they're like a triangular shape, like you just held up. Why does the Mississippi rifle have a saber bayonet?
I thought you would never ask that question. It's a good, the Mississippi rifle as issued didn't have a bayonet. There was no provision for a bayonet. And the Mississippi rifle, the model 1841, is the most altered and changed long gun that has ever been issued to the U.S. service. Prior to the Civil War, being that it didn't carry a bayonet, the different state regiments and states said, we need to fix these things to carry bayonets. So they were altered in all kinds of ways. A lot of them were altered by the national armors to either take a socket bayonet or take a saber bayonet. This particular gun with the saber bayonet you asked me about, these were altered by Ames Manufacturing Company, and it's called the New Hampshire alteration, the way they look for the saber bayonet. It's not going to mean a lot to y'all. This stuff gets real technical, and I was cautioned by my family not to run down these bunny trails and get too deep in all these details. Now, there you go. What's the matter?
Hey, you got somebody ask a question?
Chris said stay on subject, but this alteration is known as the New Hampshire alteration, and it was only done on 900 guns, and all 900 of them went to the 9th New Hampshire Infantry, which was at Vicksburg and Jackson, Mississippi. Bayonet was made by Ames Manufacturing Company in Chicopee, Massachusetts. All the reference books say they were made by Collins and Company, but that's not correct. And a lot of y'all will know, if you do a lot of research and everything, a lot of this stuff that you read, people take as facts that are in reference books are absolutely not true. I mean, they're not true. And there's research being done all the time that more and more is being uncovered. A lot has been uncovered on Confederate infield muskets. In the last 10 years, they found a world of information in South Carolina of a Confederate general who was sent to England to check on the Confederate purchasers over there, Caleb Hughes, to make sure they weren't screwing the government and trying to pocket money. They're the McRae papers, and they have given a world of information about the way arms were procured in England for the Confederacy, which is another good long talk that I ever have an opportunity to tell y'all. I can tell y'all about how the Confederate arms were procured in England. I've got a musket here in Enfield. That is the true pattern 1853 Enfield rifle musket. This gun was brought through the blockade by the Confederates. It was made in England by James Wilson, who was a Birmingham manufacturer. It's got the, this is not going to be anything to y'all, I'll just cover it quick. Got the Sinclair Hamilton crown and the SHG3 mark on it, all the little parts on it, got the Roman numeral 12 on them. But it is a true Confederate issued gun. Sling on it is original Enfield manufacture. The British, even up until when these guns were made, this one's dated 1862, they did not have the interchangeable parts. The only guns that were made in England that had interchangeable parts were made by the Royal Armory at Enfield and the London Armory, which was a private manufacturing concern in London, but their parts were interchanged. All the rest of these guns are kind of cottage industry guns where you'd have one group that would make lock plates, one group that would make hammers, one group would make barrels, and they would bring all these parts together and they would assemble them. And the people who furnished all the parts, they were called furnishers, and then the maker, who on this is stamped on there, James Wilson, he was called the setter up, and he was considered the maker, but he just had hired a lot of private gunsmiths to put these guns together. They're all like hand-fitted guns. If you've got another 1853 Birmingham Enfield, the parts will not interchange. Bayonets won't interchange, hammers won't interchange, nothing will interchange. But back when I originally started talking about, which was Eli Whitney Jr., after the Civil War, there were no demand for firearms. You know, the only thing we had was Western movement and a few Indian goings on out west. The government had all the guns they ever would want. They sold a lot of them surplus, dumped a ton of them on Europe during the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s that were fixed up Civil War muskets and everything. The government did that, so there were concerns up in the Northeast in New York that bought surplus guns that were captured from the South, and they sold them in stores just like surplus dealers sold imported World War II guns in the 50s and the 60s all over the country. But with the diminishing need for firearms, the Whitneyville Armory had a few successful designs in single-shot big bore guns. They had a real good lever action rifle that they marketed, and they marketed some double-barrel and single-barrel shotguns. But in 1888, the Whitneyville Armory ceased, and it was sold to Winchester Repeating Arms. And that was the end of the Eli Whitney endeavor. They made a ton of money on their good and serviceable guns. Eli Whitney later wrote, he spent 11 years of the best years of his life making the 1841 rifle for the U.S. government, and he never made a profit on it, but he made a killing off of his surplus dealings and his Frankenstein guns. Anybody got any questions? Tim, how long have I talked?
Man, you are doing good. You're at 23 minutes.
Really? How long have I given you?
That's 23 minutes.
See, I can see you're right. Anybody have any questions? No questions? I must have covered my topic good. We're not good enough. Did anybody have any questions?
Let's give a big round of applause. Again, I don't know if you understand where these weapons
Thank y'all
have
very
been
much.
and what they're worth, but they could probably buy my house with one of those guns. So if you want to touch a piece of history before you get out of here.
Well, if you got something rare, you also got buyers who are rare that want to buy that rare item.